The opposite of patch, in my opinion, would be the military. I can say that because I joined the military in '86 for many of the same reasons that 70% of all volunteers join, and that is economic. I joined for many of the reasons that almost all join, which is to serve a purpose greater than myself that is considered honorable by my family and my peers. And to be quite frank, I joined to prove that I was a man to my brother, to my bully dad, and to my bully friends and neighbors. So about 3 to 5 years in, I started having doubts, and it wasn't until 7 years into my military career, a friend of mine in training, we made it to the first Gulf War, and then we were in training in Fort Irwin, California, our final night of training, and he was this far away from me and was shot in the face and killed during training. I lost it, I went berserk, I wound up in Montana, long story there, come to see my show off Broadway to find out that journey, and I wandered into a theater. Now me, the youngest son of dairy farmers, formerly dairy farmers, now working class family, never been to a play before. Me, the infantry officer, right? I'm supposed to be a manly man doing manly things in a manly manner with other men. Me, that boy from Wisconsin, where theater and dancing, which is what I really wanted to do, where I was from in Wisconsin, in that neighborhood, that was for, forgive the expression, for fags. And I didn't have the courage to stand up to that until now. For some reason, I wound up in this theater. I got my ticket, checked my rucksack that I was traveling with, got my program, took my seat just as the house lights were fading. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this sun of York. And all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarms changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking-glass, I that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world, scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them, while I, in this quick piping timepiece, have no delight to pass away the time. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover, to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain, and hate the idle pleasures of these days. I was transfixed. There I sat in the audience, yet there I stood on stage. Like me, a soldier. Like me, conceived, gestated, born, and raised at a time when our nation was at war. For me, the war in Vietnam. For Richard, the War of the Roses. Okay, sure, my family wasn't murdering each other for the crown, but at the age of 6, it felt like they might. And like me, deformed, in high school, I'd suffered a severe back injury, had overcome paralysis, but muscle spasms had deformed and contorted my body so that I leaned to the right and slightly back, like this Richard. And despite our deformities, joining the military and excelling, and now finding that that military service is over, and wondering, now what? Now what? I resigned my commission, went to graduate school for acting, and in graduate school I realized I was different than my classmates. I realized that I responded differently to a helicopter, to loud noises, to the smell of diesel exhaust. And in graduate school, I'm examining these Shakespeare plays and realizing there's a solution in there. There's a solution in this training, this arts training that I didn't have the courage to stand up to before. That solution, as I describe it, is called DE-Cruit. Now, everything that you've heard today, I've stolen from them all. to make this program DE-Cruit, some unwittingly. If Kari's work had existed when I was going through this, I would not have joined the military. I can tell you that if I had attended such a program, because it possessed what I was looking for. Veterans, anywhere? No? Any veterans? Okay, just one, yes? All right, we'll talk in a second. Okay, the program is called DE-Cruit. In the interest of time, I'm going to snip forward here. I call it DE-Cruit because when I went in the military, I had a recruiter who helped me prepare for life in the military. But when I got out, there was no DE-Cruiter to help me prepare for life after the military. It is my belief that the military wires us for war. But at the end of our military service, we are not unwired from war. Right? We're tested and trained to make sure that we're fit for service. In the military, we're tested and trained to make sure we're fit for service, but afterwards, we're not tested and trained to make sure we're fit for society. I've created a program called DE-Cruit, right? The DE-Cruiter program to make that transition. It's a program that is the opposite in some ways of the military and yet uses many of the same instruments that the military uses. One of the most powerful tools that you heard today with connection that the military uses. Unit cohesion is the number one way that we increase killing. In Lieutenant Colonel Grossman's book on killing, he talks about how only 10 to 15% of trained soldiers shoot to kill. We have to increase the distance from the enemy by dehumanizing them, right? And create or increase a camaraderie, a vehement camaraderie among peers. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers and sisters, right? For he today that sheds his blood or her blood with me is my brother and my sister. They create that camaraderie, distance from the enemy, and the numbers for killing, pulling the trigger on target increase throughout our military history. Then we leave. We're trained to kill really well, trained to respond to a threat with violence, and then we're dumped back into the community from which we fled, right? Without resources. And we go back there, but different than before. Insert musical number there. So DE-Cruit is based on the military's 8 weeks of basic training, right? Let me do this, be easier from my brain. And I broke it up. 4 weeks of training, using psychology and other human sciences and nutrition, and get this, classical actor training in Shakespeare. Create classes for 4 weeks that we repeat over and over again to start making new habits to replace the military autonomic responses, such as, for example, hypervigilance. Some of the symptoms that I went through and most veterans go through: depression, rage, hypervigilance, hyperarousal and stimulation, suicidal thoughts, and addiction. One of them is that hyperarousal that I mentioned, always looking for the threat, and if we get that loud noise, classical actor training has taught me, it has shortened my recovery time. Instead of returning to the tequila bottle, I turned to classical actor training to shorten that recovery time. Shakespeare examines what it means to be a human, writing in the rhythm of the human heart, in this iambic pentameter, addressing 38, now 40 plays, saying, what does it mean to be a human being? And Shakespeare was surrounded by veterans. I find veterans in every one of his plays. So 4 weeks of classes, then 4 weeks of personal narratives from prompted journaling, interwoven with classical actor training and Shakespeare's texts, resulting at the end of 4 weeks, instead of a competitive camaraderie built on destruction and violence, it is a collaborative camaraderie built on compassion and caring and sharing and creativity and personal expression, building self-esteem and self-confidence in a new way. Instead of that, I can kill anyone, it's I can listen to anyone, right? 8 weeks of this, and then they're not just sent out, they're given skills to carry forward day after day, and then become mentors for other veterans that come in. I know this works because I've stolen from, as I mentioned, James Gilligan, Patch member, right? His work with prisons, he did this in Massachusetts and San Francisco. Carol Gilligan's work with young girls and gender. Much of that was worked with Tina Packer and Shakespeare and Company, another Patch member. I used their pedagogy heavily, their Shakespeare and classical actor training heavily. Naibi Way's work with young boys and gender, because guess who's going to join the military? Those young boys and girls that Carol and Naibi are studying and that you're all working with, and I can go on with that. But then just in the interest of time, because I'm trying to make it short, because I know we've been running over, there are members working with me now. Kent Harbor, patch member, is doing research. I have a show called Cry... Oh, I'm way ahead. Yeah, let me slow down. No. So when you... Cry Havoc. Cry Havoc is a show that I do that explains this whole journey I was just talking about, that not only lets non-veterans have a short understanding, 1 hour of their time to help understand what the transition is actually like for military veterans, not what combat is like. I can never explain that to you. But I can give you some modicum or some sense of what it's like for everyday life to hear that rumbling of the truck shaking the walls, right? And then what it's like to recover and what helps with that, how DE-Cruit does that. So Kent Harbor has been doing the research that is for Cry Havoc, which is tours nationally. It's the tip of the spear, in my opinion, of DE-Cruit, and shows people the model, shows veterans how they can express themselves, works as a skeleton, literally showing them how to interweave their own stories and find their own Shakespeare bits to be able to share, to help them communicate. Because Shakespeare gives them the tools, as Tina Packer puts it, it demands a deeper intellectual understanding. It forces us to delve more deeply into our intellects, our emotions. And then he provides the language where we may be lacking to actually express those feelings and what's going on, right? So that's why I use Shakespeare interwoven with that. Kent's research is helping me show how this works. Alicia's helping me manualize and curriculumize this, so that we can, it's not just me running around showing people, because a lot of veterans who've worked with me are now helping other veterans in Michigan and San Francisco, to name a few. So we can start spreading this to other markets, other areas. Michigan has almost no money to do this sort of thing. It's just community saying, we gotta help. A lot of vets are joining because they're broke, and then they come back, and now what do we do with them? 23 million living veterans, more than that. The VA says 23 million. Killing ourselves at a rate of 22 a day. That's 1 every hour and 9 minutes. 1 hour and 9 minutes a veteran kills themselves, from all generations and all experiences. But I mean, again, remember that the Western theater was taken from the ancient Athenian theater, Athenians theater, as far as we know, anyways, as of now, and the First Nations theater. The Athenians, were veterans. Service members and soldiers. Aeschylus and Sophocles, who are the great playwrights, were veterans, combat veterans. The First Nations people currently have no resources, but they ritualize and communalize the coming home process for their veterans. So there's models that already exist that I'm just taking from. That's why I know that DE-Cruit works, and that's why I know that firsthand that if I had seen work such as Kari's and so many of the other people's programs that I've seen here today, I would never have joined the military, because that's what I was searching for when I joined it. Meanwhile, I'm spending my adult life trying to unwire myself and creating a program.